let's go ahead and configure connection security rules in Windows Firewall with advanced security. So just to reiterate, a connection security rule forces two peer computers to authenticate before they can establish a connection and to secure information transmitted between those two computers. Now, WFAS or Windows Firewall with advanced security uses IPsec to enforce these rules. So to create a new connection security rule, we have WFAS open and click on the connection security rules node on the left pane, the console tree, and then we can click new rule on the action pane to the right. And first we are presented with the option to select what type of connection security rule we would like to create. So we have a few options such as isolation, authentication, exemption, server to server, tunnel, or custom. So we covered these in the module during our discussion, what each of these mean. So now let's go ahead and create an isolation rule. So I click next, and then I'm presented with the requirements box where we can choose what type of authentication needs to occur. So here we'll choose request authentication for inbound and outbound connection. Now this only means that authentication is requested and not mandatorily required. If I were to choose the second button here, require authentication, then actually if one or more nodes or computers is not able to provide the authentication required, the connection cannot be established. And also require authentication for inbound and outbound connections as the third option. So let's go ahead and choose the first one, the default, which is request authentication. Then click next. And next we are presented with the authentication method which we have to choose. So here we will choose computer authentication or Kerberos V5. So this only requires that the computers that are part of this communication or part of this rule be members of a domain, of a valid domain. So choose computers, computer curve, so that is Kerberos V5 authentication, and then click next, and then we come to the point where we have to select what profile we need to apply this. So obviously this rule only applies to domain computers, so I'm choosing the domain profile. And finally we have to give this a name, so let's give it a name of Contoso computers, so we can identify that with the domain name, and then we click finish. So this creates the Contoso computers connection security rule in the details pane. So we can right click and choose properties to view the properties. Now let's go to the advanced tab, and then here we have three sections. One is the profile section, and then we have interface types, and then IPsec tunneling. So in this, let's click on customize button on the interface types section. So here this will let us choose what types of interfaces or network interfaces this rule can apply to. So select these interface types option, and then we can choose remote access and click OK, and apply and OK again. So what we've done here is, if I open the properties again, we've just gone ahead and chosen the remote access interface to apply to this rule. So let's take a quick look at the other options available. So the general tab just shows the name and the description, and shows if the rule is enabled or not. The computers tab, as we spoke about during the slides in the discussion in the class, you can specify two endpoints. So endpoint 1 and endpoint 2, and it can be one IP address for either endpoint or a bunch of IP addresses. So if we were to choose these IP addresses and click on add, we can choose a single IP address, as is possible with the first radio button, or click on the second radio button and add an IP address range, or click on the third radio button and choose a predefined set of computers. So if you're passing through a gateway to access a specified set of computers on another subnet, and you can use this option. and you can do that for either endpoint. Now, the authentication tab specifies what type of authentication is performed between the computers, and the requirements section highlights or gives you the option to choose whether you are not authenticating at all with the do not authenticate option, or you're requesting inbound and outbound authentication, which is basically an optional rule. It does not actually enforce or break the communication if authentication is not provided. It only requests for authentication. The third option is require inbound and request outbound authentication. So this means that the connection coming in from the other computer must authenticate to set up the inbound connection, but the outbound is only on a request model. So if the source computer does not have credentials or does not provide sufficient authentication, it can establish a connection outbound. Finally, you have require inbound and outbound, which is the most secure, and this can make or break connections depending on what requirements have been met or not met in your network. So those are some options there, and each of those options brings up or activates the second section here, a method. What type of authentication method you want. You want to use the default computer and user, computer or user individually, or use a computer certificate from a specified certification authority. Or you can also use an advanced mode of a method of authentication where you can add authentication methods in a customized manner. And then finally, the advanced mode. Actually, I'm just going to make it default here. So, and then the advanced mode shows you what we saw earlier. So what profiles it should apply to, and then what interface it should apply to. So that was a quick overview of creating a connection security rule in WFAS.